Good morning, everyone. This is Interfaith Communities United for Justice and Peace. I'm Michael Novick. I am facilitating today, and I'll be participating later on as one of the presenters, along with Fernando and Carol Francis Lykins, because we worked on the recent event, space networking event around ending systemic racism. So we'll be coming back to that. Just a reminder that you can donate to ICUJP on the same announcement form that you got to find out about this meeting. It's the virtual green bucket where you can click on the donation page, or you can also text to make a donation. You text the gift amount to 323-701-1467, or you can actually write a check and mail it to ICUJP, care of Rod Sprott, Church Biz, B-I-Z, 1125 North Fairfax Avenue, number 46836, LA 90046. All of that is in every announcement. And I guess we'll start this morning with introductions. Not too many of us here yet, but Carol Francis.
Oh, hi, I'm Carol Francis Lykins. I'm with ICUJP and the board. I'm a poet and writer, retired teacher, and I also work with IFCO Pastors for Peace.
Steve Rohde, our chair.
Morning, everyone. Glad to see you. Active with this group, of course, but also the ACLU, Bend the Arc, a Jewish Partnership for Justice, the Black Jewish Justice Alliance, and Death Penalty Focus.
Thanks, Rose Leibowitz, who will be doing our reflection in a little bit.
Morning, Rose Leibowitz, Michael's All Angels, Episcopal Church, Studio City, and North Hollywood Homeless Alliance.
Vida?
Did you say Vida?
Yeah, Vida.
Good morning. I'm Vida Beach, member of Culver Palms United Methodist Church, and on the board of ICUJP.
And well read. Phil?
Hi, I'm Phil Way. I'm with the Orange Grove Friends meeting in Pasadena.
Thanks. Lucy?
I'm Lucy Bailey, and I've been coming to ICUJP because Leland Stewart and Stephen Fisk brought me years ago through Unity and Diversity World Council. Thank you.
Thanks. Barbara?
Barbara Pampelon, and I'm out in the San Fernando Valley and just very, very interested in your work.
Great. Thanks. Fernando?
Good morning to everyone. Fernando. I'm with Black and Brown Unity, also supporting a dozen different organizations as well. Thank you.
Thanks. I see Stephen Fisk just joined us. Maybe you can introduce yourself, Stephen, and rename yourself if you have a chance. You're muted, Stephen. Get my cup.
Hi, yes, I am not Amy Kamala. That's my daughter. Somehow I'm connected through this, through her, but I'll change my name. I'm Stephen Fisk. I am a musician, an author, an interfaith minister, longtime ICUJP guy, and I'm very happy to be here as always. I just returned from a long journey up north where I was performing. I gave my first concert in 2 years. Full evening concert, which was wonderful, and also lectured and was on a panel and so forth. So I'm back, and I'm glad to be here with all of you. And I'll change my name.
Thanks. And then Soraya M. Dean is with us. Soraya, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Soraya Dean, longtime ICUJP follower and participant. Community organizer. I call on religious traditions to defend and secure the dignity and human rights for women.
Thank you. And my much longer introduction was in the announcement of the meeting because, as I said, I'm participating in the presentation, but I'm with Anti-Racist Action and if not now, Jewish Voice for Peace and the local board chair at KPFK, as well as active here at ICUJP on the board. And I guess we'll go to the reflection by Rose. Hopefully more people will be joining us. Sorry that you're speaking
All
to a
that
small
hard work
house.
for nothing, you know? No, I'm joking. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm kind of half reading and half going to show you things, so excuse me if I'm looking down at my thing. After I went through a pretty tough time a few years ago, I found myself reading detective novels, one after the other. I can tell you all about fictional crime in Scotland, Norway, Uganda, in Los Angeles, and in many other countries, and places and times, Roman times, medieval times, Victorian times. The genre is great. It exercises the brain to a certain extent, but it isn't too demanding. And however ghoulish, you know it's not true, and the good guys will win. However, I must be coming out of this because I recently read 2 non-fiction books that are making major changes in my thought processes. It is really exciting to suddenly find 2 books at the same time that are so impactful. I'm going to introduce you to each of them and hold them up so you can actually see them. Book number 1, and I can hide my face for this, I had actually heard about, whoops. Can you see it or is it back to front for you? For me, it's all kind of like mirror writing.
Entangled Life, we see it, yeah.
Yeah, okay, for me it's mirror writing, so I just looked at it and thought, what? Anyway, this one I heard about, but I picked it up in a bookshop in England. There's also a rather spectacular Cliff Notes version on Netflix about one of the people in it, if you want to see it. That is called Fantastic Fungi. And indeed they are. Did you know that mycelium, which is the root-like structure that connects fungi, can go for miles and miles and links to trees and other plant roots? And if one tree is needing certain elements of nutrition, the tree can receive it from another nearby tree through the mycelium. I mean, I find that just astonishing. We only see fungi through their reproductive organ that comes to the surface to spread spores. Fungi, it turns out, have a very big effect throughout nature, and the familiar enough mushrooms that we eat are merely that reproductive organ. It also seems they can clean up polluted areas, and even in one very big effort through nature and familiar enough, no, sorry, I'm losing my lines here. And one extraordinary experiment, we're able to consume cigarette butts and flourish as an edible fungi on top of the destroyed butts. I found that great. This can change a lot of the way we look at nature, and especially in these days of global warming and pollution. So theoretically, there are new ways to help with these problems. Then, of course, there are the psychedelic properties with psilocybin, which both the book and the TV program go into in some depth, which links me wonderfully to book 2. Far-ranging ideas in book 1 suggest eating magic mushrooms may have expanded our brains to create humans. Book 2 dismisses this as the stoned ape theory. So book 2, I bought because I read a review of it in the Guardian Weekly and thought, this is my type of book, I have to go and get it. I didn't realize at the time that it hadn't even been published. So I went, and for the first time in my life, I actually got it the very day it came out. I'm nowhere near the end of this yet. As you can see, it's rather fat. So I'm going to give you an overview as far as I've got. It is written by an anthropologist and an archaeologist working together using their fields of study. One of them, in fact, was from my department in Alma Mater, which made me feel really good about it. It has conventional wisdom about really ancient history on its head, with a special emphasis on the concept of inequality. This really resonates, I think, with a lot of us here. I'm sure we all remember the evolutionary story that we were told, largely Darwinian, I think, about how our ancestors were hunters and gatherers. Then they kind of discovered a few cereals and things. Then they became sedentary. Then they became kind of farmers. And then the cities evolved. Well, this book is questioning that, which I love. For example, reading historical documents written by Jesuits on the first meetings between Jesuits and Native Americans turns a lot of this on its head. It is giving equal weight to the Americans and the cultures of the indigenous societies a full 100 years ago, and the Europeans that came and destroyed them. A leader of one of the tribes regains his voice and his opinion of Jesuit culture of the 16th century by kind of refinding and republishing what was known to, presumably always to academics, but certainly not to me, the things that he wrote, where he wasn't that impressed by Jesuit culture. But then neither would we be, if you think about the Jesuits and how tight they would have been, and there'd be no women available at all in the thing. I mean, it would have been very different from our culture today. Then the archaeologist takes over in the next chapter, talking about recent research from the last 2-3 decades, when I really was not following archaeology, and all these relatively developed communities and cities that have been dated to as early as 35,000 years ago, way older than we ever thought. As you might expect, much of our conventional ideas come from European digs, but now digs all over the world are developing more elaborate structures, burials, and more complex cultures. I must confess, my enthusiasm for these books causes me to stop while I'm still in the middle of reading one of them. But the overall message I want to give in this reflection is that it's good to be back in the world of nonfiction, and I hope my brain is functioning again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I had an article in Turning the Tide a couple of years ago about the mycorrhizomes and the way in which trees communicate with each other through the fungi and share resources, nurture each other. It's really quite amazing. And then I also pre-ordered
This one.
Before it came out, and picked it up in my neighborhood bookstore. And it's interesting because even in Europe, they talk about the massive cities in the Ukraine that were organized on an egalitarian basis, thousands of years earlier than people give credit to,
Rose, I knew I liked you. If you can see,
yes,
if you can see my picture.
All the advanced copies have gone to this group in Los Angeles.
I started reading this last night, and I'm as fascinated with it as you are.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should do a whole program on it.
We could do. We could.
Yeah.
Maybe we should do a book club.
Yeah, I just did a screenshot of the books. So it's a way of, rather than writing down the titles, I do a screenshot.
Right. Well, you've got 3 copies in this group, 9 people.
David Graeber, who unfortunately passed away just before the book was came out, he was able to complete it. But he's the author of Debt: The First 5,000 Years. Is one of the theoreticians behind the Occupy movement, and really a major public intellectual.
Yeah. Anyway, 2 great books. If you're not one of the 3 people that have bought them, I suggest you research them. I did order it from the library in the hopes that if enough people order it, I don't know if you know this, if enough people order a book through the LA Public Library, they keep a record and then they will actually buy it. So it's worth just, if you think it's a good book, ordering it through the library, because if enough people do so, then it'll be available to everybody. Anyway.
No wonder you think alike.
Hey, Rose, could you put the titles and authors in the chat?
I will indeed.
Thank you.
Grace in the chat says her internet is very unstable, but she's saying good morning, and a couple of other people joined us late. Maggie, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Maggie Hutchinson. I'm a member of the Santa Monica Friends Meeting and ICUJP board, at least for now.
And Father Chris?
Good morning, Father Chris Planet, St. Camilla's, Pax Christi, Death Penalty Focus, and ICUJP. Good to see you.
So we are going to move to our presentation. Hopefully more people will be joining us. It's
Michael,
kind of yes?
By way of an affiliate report.
Oh, yes, that's right. Sorry, that's right. Go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to remind people of our calendar for the rest of the year. We are not meeting next Friday. We wish everyone a happy and healthy Thanksgiving. So we're not meeting on Friday, the 26th, next Friday. Then we'll continue meeting in the early weeks of December. December 17 is our holiday party. We hope everyone will join us. We're planning some special events for that. And then we will not meet on December 24, the day after the Christian holiday of Christmas.
Before.
And then, but we do meet on December 31st. The last day of the year is a Friday. Traditionally, people go out that night, but we've met on that day, and we'll wish everybody a happy new year. And then we continue into January based on our regular schedule. So I hope everybody will follow that schedule, won't sit here for a half hour waiting for ICUJP when we're not here. And we'll send reminders of this schedule over the next few weeks. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, I should mention actually also that because kind of Steve glided over it, but December 10th, we actually need both a facilitator and a reflector. So if they're not on our schedule yet, Ruby's not with us. She normally does try to recruit those. So if anybody on this somewhat abbreviated call wants to.
I'm happy to be a reflector on that one. I haven't been a reflector for a while.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
It is International Human Rights Day.
Sounds a good one to reflect, not reflect, to facilitate.
I'm sorry.
Wait, you mean facilitate?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So
Right.
Rose will be the facilitator. Anybody interested in being the reflector a couple of weeks hence? I'm actually reflecting next Friday.
But I'll be happy to reflect.
Okay. All right, great. Let's.
The date is again December
10th, 2 weeks, 3 weeks off. And next week we don't have the session.
Michael, will you pass that information on to Morgan?
Yeah, I'll put it in the on the grid
In the chart.
when I have a chance.
Thank you.
So this morning we are doing a presentation based on the faith-based networking event we had a week or so ago, and Carol Francis and Fernando and I will be the presenters, and we're hoping to have a good discussion among people in ICUJP about how to what we learned, what we got out of it, and how we can build it forward. So I think Carol Francis is going to start with a report on the event itself and ask for some discussion. And then Fernando will talk about a couple of issues or political questions we'd like to resolve. And then I'll be talking a little bit about next steps. And each of those will hope to have people participating. So go ahead, Carol Francis.
Okay. Yes. Greetings. Thank you for being here this morning. And thank you to any of you that were there on November 7th. I'm going to start by saying the numbers of people that turned out. When you do an event with Melina Abdullah and George Gascon, you can expect a whole lot of people will be there simply because they want to hear Melina Abdullah or George Gascon, not necessarily wanting to help build a movement. So you can expect that if you get hundreds of people to an event on with big name people like that you will get fewer people if you don't have any big name people. And we, the committee people, decided we didn't want to have any big name people. We wanted somebody to talk about environmental racism, somebody talking about medical racism, somebody talking about racism in the legal system, and somebody talking about racism in education, and somebody talking about I can never think of all 5 of them at once, but the idea of having people whose names are not big draws, but they would speak very shortly, and then we would get into breakout rooms where we can talk about building the movement. So I said that if we got somewhere between 35 and 45 people on November 7th, I would feel like it was a success. And we got 44. So 1 person less than the top number I hoped for. So I think in that way, it was really good. And we had a great mix of Native American, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, not only in the speakers, but in the people that turned out. So I was very happy about that. In terms of building the movement, we worked on getting especially interfaith groups and church groups and mosques and synagogues to endorse or co-sponsor it. And we got the Justice and Peace Committee of the South Coast Interfaith Council. We got the Church in Ocean Park, which is an interfaith group in Santa Monica. And we got the Committee Against Racism in Santa Monica. We got, no surprise, we got both Anti-Racist Action and so we laid a basis. We got a we got a foundation for building the movement. And I was watching with my 94-year-old neighbor, and his words were something to the effect of, it was a great start. You're building a base that worked. So I was really happy with that. I had favorite speakers, but I don't want to start off with that. I want to start off with anybody who was there and you want to talk about any speaker that you thought was particularly good, what worked for you, what didn't work for you. And those of you who weren't there, if you want to talk about why, we don't need to hear, my mother was sick, I had to get her to the hospital. Whatever your reason, I'm sure you had a good reason. And we're going to assume that. But if there's something that you could say about what we could do next time to get ICUJP members who will have no problem with getting here at 7:30 in the morning, but can't get there on a major event unless we have Gascon and Abdullah. And quite frankly, I was unhappy that there weren't more ICUJP people there, but I'm sure people had reasons. And I'm not going to ask you to take turns telling us what the reasons, but if there's anything you can contribute to maybe help get more ICUJP people, the next time, that's good. So anybody who was there and you'd like to talk about what worked for you, who most excited you, did you hear anything that you never heard before and it just really made you think about something that you hadn't thought of before? Just go ahead and raise your hand either this way or with a little hand thing.
Stephen Fisk, I know you stepped up to help facilitate one of the breakout groups. I don't know if you wanted to share something.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was involved with facilitating the environmental rights group, and it was great. I thought both speakers were terrific. Hopkins, was that, am I saying the name
Yeah.
correctly?
Hopkins, yeah.
Yes, and the Native American man whose name I don't have in front of me.
George Funmaker.
George Funmaker, yeah. They were terrific. They were terrific speakers, both representing from the indigenous perspective and from the civil rights perspective. But, you know, all these perspectives overlap into everything that we do. When we talk about racism and we talk about those people who have been denied their rights and overlooked in terms of the environment, it all comes down to our humanity, our basic humanity, that we are brothers and sisters on this planet, and we have to learn to live in accordance with the natural order of things. Otherwise, we're just killing ourselves. We're creating rape to ourselves on this planet, and it's predatorial. So I was impressed with both speakers. We shared a lot of thoughts, a lot of dialogue, and in terms of our environmental concern, this is really foremost on the agenda of humanity these days. We are living in a time where our existence is threatened and where we are suffocating in our waste and destroying the life-giving system that supports us. And we're involved in the point of conversion, where we're moving from fossil fuel addiction to renewables. And this transition is extremely difficult because we have an infrastructure that's been built for more than a century. I was just driving through Richmond, California, and driving past these oil refinery processing plants that are so huge, and the ships that are delivering, you know, fossil fuel everywhere. And Richmond is also a community that suffers from having these refineries right in their midst, and it's primarily a Black community. So, and we talked about the Standing Rock and the efforts to return to understanding the sacredness of the earth, and that these fracking pipelines are a violation of that sacredness and a violation, because they're not building these pipelines through white communities. They're building them through indigenous communities and poor communities, people of color. Same thing happened in Virginia with the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And that was an example of a coalition of grassroots organizations from Black communities, from church groups, from Sierra Club, getting their act together to defeat the oil companies of Dominion and Duke Oil. This was a mega billion-dollar pipeline, and they were defeated. They were defeated by a coalition of grassroots activists who got their act together. And so this is a story that tells us that there's hope when activists come together and unify for a righteous cause, which is the preservation of our very environment, our life support system. We can make a difference in this world. And both speakers were extremely inspirational in that regard. So I thought it was great. And I thought the whole thing was great. And I regret that I was not more a part of the organizing of it, but I think it's a terrific plan. And I thought the whole thing was very successful.
Thanks, Stephen. You know, one of the slogans that people always use at the Black Lives Matter rallies around the ending police associations is "When we fight, we win." And I think that that's
Right.
part of what we're trying to get a sense of is how we can win some of these struggles. So I think that's really good input. Thank you, Steve. Rhodey has a hand up.
Yes, I'm going to flip the usual process and begin by thanking Carol Francis and Michael and Fernando and everybody on the subcommittee, many of whom are on the screen, for the vision and the ambition to set this up. I think my notes, by the way, indicate there were 46 screens, so slightly more
It's
than
even better.
yeah, and a few technical difficulties, and a speaker didn't show up. But look, for a full actually went about 2.5 hours. I thought it was an excellent foundation for this notion of creating a just and peaceful world standing against systemic racism. So I'm hopeful that toward the end of today's discussion, we'll talk about future plans and how to shape this and organize it going into the future. I was very impressed with right from the opening. You know, you come to these events wanting to learn something, and George Funmaker really shook me up by saying that a lot of progressive groups these days begin meetings with land acknowledgements. This is a genuine good faith effort to say that we live on stolen land. Bend the Arc begins its meetings by specifically naming the tribes in Southern California, and they give a very earnest land acknowledgement. But George Funmaker said acknowledgement's not enough. You can't acknowledge and then move on. You've got to support indigenous rights and the founding racism of this country, even before the original sin of slavery. So I already went to another meeting last night and said, land acknowledgement isn't enough. I then chose to move into the working group on the legal system. And this turned out, you know, these small groups can be a wonderful opportunity to meet people, to have time to listen, to express yourself. And we had a wonderful group. I had made a note of about 8 people in our working group. Early on, someone said, love leaves no room for racism. We met a woman, Atra, whose son was convicted of murder, got 3 life sentences, had to struggle through 4 trials and appeals to the 9th Circuit until he was acquitted, but not until the process almost bankrupted the family for legal fees and the terrible disruption of him being in jail for 17 years. And I'll put in an insert that only yesterday we saw that 2 men in New York falsely accused and convicted of the murder of Malcolm X were finally exonerated. And Julius Jones in Oklahoma was saved yesterday. We expanded because the people who came to our breakout, 2 of them were involved in board and care workers, these wonderful, hardworking people who care for individuals who need attention, but they're paid $35 a day.
A day?
Not an hour, a day. This is scandalous. They are trying to organize an association. The Board of Supervisors has asked them to form an association which this county can bargain with, like with a union, and they're hopeful to get better working hours, better working conditions, and better pay. One of those people said the people they care for are invisible people, and so are the workers. The issue came up that in this community, in this country, incarceration is a profit center. The more people incarcerated, the more prisons and detention centers get built, the more prison guards. The Prison Guards Union in California is a hugely powerful union that donates money to political candidates to keep their stranglehold on the incarceral system because it is a profit center. We then went through some other work. Then we reconvened in a plenary for short presentations from each of the 5 breakouts, which I thought was very helpful. And we had a lovely closing by Ruth Brody Sharon, who's been with us here and in the Parliament of World Religions, speaking of why justice shall you pursue. The word justice is repeated twice. And it was during that closing that I told the group that as far as I'm concerned, systemic racism demands systemic anti-racism. And I think that's exactly what this program is building. So I hope next time more of you can attend, we can spread the word wider, we can have more breakouts. But I think we're on to something here. And I'm grateful to everyone who was instrumental in organizing this.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I'm sorry, I muted myself. I was thanking Steve, and I pointed out that Dr. Ruby joined us, who also did participate quite actively in planning it and on the day. And Avon is here on her computer and her phone. Avon, you need to mute your phone because we can hear you coughing.
Okay, sorry.
I don't know if Dr. Ruby wants to say a little bit. Oh, Rose has a hand up. Go ahead, Rose.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, because I shared this in the meeting last Friday, and Stephen, my takeout from our breakout group was very different from yours, which I think is interesting. I mean, I think it's just a dialogue that we kind of need to happen, because I was actually, and it's not your fault at all, disappointed in the breakout group, because our 2 speakers basically, in my perception, repeated what they'd said in the first session. And I didn't feel we really moved beyond that. And I kind of ended up frustrated because there are so many environmental racism issues around, and they were hardly touched upon. I don't know whether you remember, but I tried to bring a couple of them up kind of toward the end, but time was very limited at that point. So maybe we just all have different expectations of what a great breakout group should be. I don't know, but it was just interesting that we came away with such different visions.
Well, what were the points that you felt were not communicated?
I felt that, what's his name, George Funmaker, he repeated what he'd said at the beginning. I mean, we'd already heard about reparations to Native Americans, which is important. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't, but it was like a repeat of what he'd said at the beginning. I didn't feel he moved on to anything else. And Hop, the same. He went into a little bit more depth from what he'd said at the beginning, but I didn't feel he really moved into the environment. And he's working for the Sierra Club. There are so many environmental issues. He mentioned the Amazon warehouses in the desert, which is an environmental issue, but it's also an issue in lots of other ways. But beyond that, I don't know, I just hope that we'd have more concrete ideas and examples and names of groups that we could link with, which are environmental groups that are kind of active, maybe in our area, that we could work with. And I I came away a little kind of frustrated by it.
Well, that was an opportunity for you to express your concerns and probe deeper into the speakers for further depth of dialogue. The breakout sessions are supposed to be dialogue sessions, question and answers, where we can ask the pertinent questions that we feel are important.
Yeah, I
can
think
I-
we probably did not communicate well enough that the speakers were meant to be resource people in the breakout groups, and that we wanted the breakout groups to be more participatory and dialogical.
Mhm.
So that
Yeah.
might be on us as the
Right.
the group that organized it. There are a couple of hands up from people who haven't spoken yet. Lucy?
Oh, thank you. I wanted to say that when Stephen said he was shook up by what was said about the land being stolen, I had that reaction as well. I was very shocked, I guess, to think that the land is stolen that we're on and that we built a civilization. But then I think I've said this before, and I'm really mulling it over. The land really can't be stolen because it's not owned. It belongs to the earth. And I think that there is a place to go forward in sharing the land, in stewardship of the land. And I think if we fall apart into arguing about whose land it was, we're not going to go forward like we need to. It's all of our land. We're all in the same boat, and we're all losing our lives. So I think when Michael said when we fight we win, that was very encouraging. But I'm not sure that we want to break into a fight. I think we need to have a discussion about how to properly care for our land, for our lives. So I really am so glad that this is what Carol Francis said about building a movement, that the point of this is to build a movement. And where Michael said that there is hope, and Stephen also. I've said enough. Thank you.
I want to give a quick response to that, and then Fernando has a hand up, and we're going to probably transition to his segment also. But I think that when people say the land is stolen, it doesn't mean that it belonged to them. I think the indigenous view is that the people belong to the land, actually, and that they are, rooted and are stewards and do have a sense of the sacredness of Mother Earth. And I think that the European colonizers who came imposed the idea of privatization on that, and so in the sense of saying stolen land doesn't mean that like a piece of property that was stolen. It's a different concept of land and the relationship of people to the land and the land to the people that we're trying to struggle against. I think.
I heard a young brave, say one time that if we hadn't been so busy fighting each other, we wouldn't have let the colonists take over. And that's, I think, what I'm trying to say. And of course, Stephen put in the chat that we're not all in the same boat. I would say we are all in the same boat. It's just some people are in steerage and some people are not. I've said enough. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
the problem might be at this point the boat is sinking, but there's a really fascinating book called.
Thank you. Sorry.
There's a fascinating book, if we're mentioning books that people might want to read, is 1491, which is to say the year before Columbus invaded. And it does talk about the fact that the Spanish and other colonizers were able to divide and conquer and take advantage of divisions that existed and contradictions that existed in indigenous society in order to carry out the conquest. So people are not glamorizing, romanticizing what was here, but there was a different fundamental relationship of many of the indigenous people. Let's go to Fernando, because I think we do want to transition to second segment of this report back.
And I want to say one more thing before we go on.
Go ahead.
No, Fernando, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Fernando.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment. Everybody has said. I mean, I agree with many of the discussion that's going on. But we have to realize that we have different understanding, different education, different background, different culture. And so we have to at least recognize that and put it on the table to more or less deepen our understanding in terms of resolving many of this systemic racism, because the systemic racism is also, affecting you, me, and all of us in terms of, like as Steve said, this prison industrial complex is really taking a toll in terms of our resources, beside the military industrial complex, that taking $1 trillion every year, and so we have to interconnect many of these issues to hopefully connect it to systemic racism, or else we're just fighting among each other if we look at this as a narrow view of looking at things. This is not a personal thing. This is a systemic that we need to deal with and so forth. But anyhow, that's my comment on none of this discussion.
Carol France, you had something, and then we'll come back to Fred in a minute.
Yeah.
And Phil has a hand also.
I just want to say, Steve said earlier, it would be good if we talk about where we're going next, and that's what Michael's going to be talking about. I wanted to finish off my part with saying I was really impressed. We had somebody, we were asked to speak on the Native American, the Muslim, the Christian, and the Jewish teachings that are about racism. And unfortunately, because we went way over time, our Christian person who was going to speak didn't get to speak because Janet's organization against racism was meeting at 6, and we weren't near through by then. And it was partially because of computer glitches, techno glitches, and it was partially because people didn't stick to their time limit. But I will want to say that I was really impressed with the number of Muslim speakers we had. And the person who I was most impressed with was Ayub, the Sheikh Ayub Harun, who actually did exactly what we asked him to do. And he talked about one time when Muhammad ran into somebody who was an Arab being racist against an African, and he chastised him for that and said, this is not what our religion's about. And the other thing Ayub talked about was when the Prophet met a Jew who was down on his luck and was really afraid that he was going to starve to death because he was living in an Islamic world, and Muhammad personally took care of his needs. And so this sort of thing, this telling the story of their own religious story about why racism isn't good, I was really impressed with that. And I asked my 94-year-old neighbor, who had been an activist since he was 18 at least, have you ever heard a Muslim talk about what Islam says? And he said, no. So I think if our people who had never heard, maybe they've never heard a Jewish woman talk about why in the Jewish community beliefs racism is wrong. And maybe they've certainly never heard a Muslim person talk about that. I think that was really a plus. And we did have quite a few Muslims that were there as members.
Thank you. So, Phil, you had your hand up. Why don't you go ahead, and then we'll come back to Fernando for a couple of points. And as Carol Francis said, we'll wrap up with a discussion about next steps.
Kind of a brief comment. I think it was something that George said in the environmental racism breakout. It was, excuse me. He used the phrase that America every November celebrates the myth of American innocence. And I have long been someone who's rather outside the loop on Thanksgiving, but that really struck a chord with me. And then I find myself wondering on my anticipation of going to family Thanksgiving gatherings if I am brave enough to bring that perspective. But it finds that I think it is one of the best statements I've ever heard about what's wrong with Thanksgiving.
Yeah, one phrase that was used was thanks-taking rather than Thanksgiving.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if I'm right about this, but I did hear at one point that United States of America is the only country that has an actual national day of thanks. So, okay, we need to correct our history, not rewrite our history, but correct the mistakes that we made in our history and do things right. Like Fernando just said, not fight amongst ourselves. But if that is true, that we have a national day of thanks, maybe we're in line for a good start. Anybody correct me on that?
I agree. I think that the term Thanksgiving is important because we need to learn to give rather than take. But that's what has happened with our colonization, the European colonization. For example, I grew up in New York City, where in the school system, we celebrated the fact that Peter Minuet, who was the governor of New Amsterdam, purchased Manhattan Island from the native indigenous people for $24 worth of trinkets and pots and pans and stuff. And that was like, oh boy, what a bargain we got. Let's celebrate that. For the Native American people, it was an opportunity to trade some goods and get some items that they'd never seen before. But to Peter Minuet, it was a sale. It was an opportunity for commodification of land and the exploitation and extraction of resources, which is completely unheard of for indigenous people. And so there's these juxtaposition of cultural contexts came into play.
So this is where we have
I'm
to.
sorry, Lucy, excuse me.
Sorry.
Vita's had the hand up for a while, and
Yeah.
if people have their hands up who already spoke could lower their hands, because I can't do that. Carol Francis could lower it, or you could lower it yourself.
Thank
Vita,
you.
why don't you go ahead?
I just think there is a Thanksgiving in Canada, a Thanksgiving Day in Canada. I don't know of any other countries that have ours and theirs, but I know they do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that there's a little bit of gratitude expressed on Thanksgiving, but it tends to be in the United States much more connected to gorging on food and maybe
Oh, no.
watching football games or basketball games or something. I want to come back to Fernando, but I did want to have a couple of comments about the Carol Francis's part of it, which is what impressed me about the draw of people that we did have is that it was very diverse, more so than a general ICUJP Friday forum, and that a lot of people stepped up. I did get apologies later from the speaker we anticipated to talk on the criminal justice system, Dolores Canales, who said that she had felt ill the day before and actually conked out well into the day, slept through the whole day that we were scheduled to have her on. So she apologized for that, and I did want to share that. But in the group, which had no resource person, the members of the group were the resource people, as Steve made clear, and I think that that was very impressive to me. A lot of people really, came with things they wanted to share and had a chance to do so and informed the discussion in that way. And I think that Karen Hilfman, who came, who's involved with Jewish anti-racist group and also working around reparations, is going to come forward as a speaker, and she suggested other speakers that we could have. So I think that we did make a lot of connections or revive connections that will be valuable going forward. Fernando, I think you wanted to speak more about a couple of themes that we were hoping for, and we wanted to draw out in terms of both the relationship between the racism in the global area and within the U.S. and the question of peace and as it relates to racism. Did you want to say a little more about that?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank you. Everything that we had discussed is really legitimate. These are interconnected to the bigger picture that we need to come to terms with. This systemic racism. The need to tackle this systemic racism. It need, as people said, it need a systemic solution. This cannot be this cannot be achieved by a handful of people. It will need it takes a critical mass to make an effect of change. This is the reality that we need to face to it. I mentioned that because it's also connected to the system itself. For example, the neoliberalization policies. This privatization is really making an effect in terms of our taxes or resources that are being spent. Prison industrial complex, it takes about at least $200 billion in a year. Then you have this military industrial complex that also take, at least $1 trillion or more, to sustain that budget. It taking a lot of toll, in all of us, indirectly or directly. It's also affecting, all of us in terms of, why there's so many homelessness. The person in our on our room, that we have discussed, also fighting for resources. How do we, the question is that how do we tackle this? So we have to tackle it in a way, that really put it on the table that this systemic racism is within the system itself. The neoliberalization policies that privatize many of these, the prison industrial complex, the military industrial complex, and including the union itself. The labor union is also controlled by the monopoly capitalism. This is the reality. It takes 86,000, at least that was maybe 5 years ago, to incarcerate a person. That's equivalent to, at least $200 billion every year. Where are we gonna get that resources? It will take more money from you, from education and so forth, to sustain many of this, and there's many research now that that 300,000 that it's involved the police, the 300,000 case that also being investigated at this point, and only 17,000 has they done they done this investigation, and it's coming out that many of these people, at least 80 to 90%, is innocent. And so the evidence is there, but of course, there's also a power within the system itself that holding many of this investigation and so forth. So we have a very difficult problem, and so let's see. Then you have this, to criminalize our youth. This is a tremendous toll in terms of, when the Black people are also being criminalized, through this three-strike laws and this, I get lost. The three-strike law that's affecting them, which also create a prison balloon in the jail system. We have to really examine many of these laws, because wasting that money, and that money can be put in education to turn many of these criminal activities. What do we really expect if we neglect the people itself that also being criminalized, and we continue to do that at this point, and so what is the use? This is a massive criminalization, particularly among Black. You only have 12 to 13% of Blacks in this country, but in terms of disparity of sentencing in the court system, or the criminal system, the majority are Black and the brown at this point, and the rising, among women, it's also becoming evident now. Mm-hmm. And so we have to also look at this as doesn't mean this is a problem. This is going to be a solution as well, because as I said, we know the problem, but the will to tackle many of the systemic problem is also critical for us to pursue this justice, justice for all, because it's not just Black now. Many of white people are also incarcerated in jail, and using these white supremacists to defend the system is also evident. And so I will just leave it as that for now, and maybe people have questions, and so I will answer it.
Yeah, thank you, Fernando. I see Barbara has a hand up.
Yes, am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm thinking right now, money rules almost everything. And I have to preface also that back in the 1980s, Bill Gates came to the Rotary International Convention and announced that he personally would, through his foundation, would contribute $3 for every $1 that Rotarians put in for polio. And so I kind of have half worshipped Bill Gates for years and years, because he was so wonderful to the Rotary Club. He also got a lot of volunteers to do things. And recently, I read about the fact that in this new stimulus bill, there's going to be money, that there's suggested to be money to buy land for some former descendants of former slaves to be able to go back to farming where they want to go, where they want to farm land. And Bill Gates is buying quantities of land right now because he can do things at a massive scale. And he's buying quantities of land now. And I look at it and say, okay, if that's what you're doing, you know that the federal government's really going to be paying more for the land, and you're going to make a profit because that's how you make money. And it's true that he does a lot of philanthropies, but right now I'm finding that those two things very difficult to compute in my mind. Is people that have money know how to make money, and money is ruling the world. And we have screwed up our whole systems. And I'll take my hand down if I can figure out where it was that I pushed.
It's in the reactions.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I've been punching buttons.
Mhm. Yeah, if you point to reactions and click on that, it should say lower hand instead of raise hand. There you go. So thank you. Well, I think that's an interesting transition because I wanted to talk about some of the goals we had and how we see the next steps. There were a few reasons that we decided to try to build a faith-based network on ending systemic racism as the follow-up to the programs we did. We had done those two programs, as Carol Francis said at the beginning, with Dr. Melina Abdullah and George Gascon, and those focused primarily on the question of racism in policing and in prosecution in the criminal justice system. And we wanted to expand the scope of, the question of systemic racism beyond that arena. So that's why we sought the speakers and resource people on the question of environmental racism and racism in medicine and healthcare and racism in the educational system, racism in housing, because we do think all those things intersect. But the other aspect of it was to build a faith-based network because of what Fernando said about trying to build a critical mass to actually deal with those problems. How can we actually build a movement? And I think one of the sectors of society that has the capacity to do that are people in faith-based communities. So whether they're Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindu, Buddhist, those are all mass phenomena. I mean, this is an increasingly secular society, and the percentage of people who are, churchgoers or whatever, other denomination has been reduced, but that's still a significant sector, along with, again, in an increasingly sort of anomic and individualized society. That's a place that people do come together and can unite. And so trying to build a faith-based network was a way to see how can we build on discussions that have taken place. There was, going back to, again, what Fernando was saying, people may remember that there was, in response to the book, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, I think hundreds and hundreds of faith-based communities around the country actually had reading groups around that book and tried to examine themselves in relation to the question of mass incarceration and the criminal justice system as a way in which the badges of slavery were still being enforced in this society. And now, in response to George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement and related issues, there's been a similar thrust in a lot of communities. And I think we wanted to work with that, but also to look at the question of charity and philanthropy, because the initial impulse, I think, of a lot of faith-based communities is to both look at the question of racism maybe only internally in terms of people's own psychological and cultural structure and how they have cut themselves off from other people, and then to think about reaching out a hand in a charitable way or a philanthropic way. And the problem with that is it's not systemic. It doesn't respect people's agency. It doesn't respect the idea that we need to transform the system that creates inequality and transform the system that creates poverty. And that the philanthropic or the charitable solution is based on the idea that the poor are always with us, and a paternalistic approach. So I think that what we're trying to struggle for is a more egalitarian and a more communitarian way of dealing with these issues, and trying to find also an interfaith solution, which is ICUJP, that it's not enough to have each religion or religious group on its own approaching the issue, but how can we communicate with each other, overcome those cultural and racial and religious differences that divide us and prevent us from having the impact we need to have it systemically. And I think the other thing we were looking for, therefore, was, in a sense, a more radical solution. Not Band-Aids and not a charity, but really looking at, what Steve said earlier, systemic racism requires systemic anti-racism, and systemic anti-racism, in my mind, has to do with really looking at that whole question of privatization of land and privatization of resources and exploitation. So those are some of the things we were trying to broach in this effort. And so the next steps we're thinking about that we did discuss in the working group or the joint committee where we had last week is the idea of trying to do, as opposed to an event, the next thing would be more of an invitational working meeting of people who actually, have come to some of these things. So we do have contact lists that have come out of both that session where we asked people to put their information in the chat who are interested, and going back to the first program we had with Dr. Abdullah and George Gascon, people who said they were interested in pursuing it on a working basis. And so what we're thinking of proposing is that the next meeting not be a big public event, but be, as I say, more of a networking, working meeting. And the people that we invite are people like the ones that Carol Francis mentioned. There were people from, Church in Ocean Park, and people from the Orange Coast Interfaith Council, and who are doing some of this work and trying to see how we can, build something more extensive than any of us is currently involved in, and figure out really how to do that in a kind of step-by-step way. I mentioned that Karen Hilfman, who I have known over quite some time from both the Jewish anti-racist group and also from Aware LA and White People for Black Lives, mentioned bringing someone in from White People for Black Lives to one of these discussions. And the other work I do is around Pacifica, and Pacifica actually had a couple of we had a couple of national town halls from Pacifica Fight Back around the question of systemic racism, and we had people from Black Lives Matter, and then we had people from Surge, which is showing up for racial justice. It's a national network, primarily of people of European descent, trying to be in solidarity. And that includes White People for Black Lives here in LA and some similar groupings around the country. And one of the things they put forward to the folks in Pacifica that I think also speaks to ICUJP is the need to see ourselves as organizers, not just educators or advocates, but actually to think about how do you build a base, how do you grow a movement, how do you bring people together in a conscious, strategic way to actually make gains and sort of pass the torch to a new generation of people who are coming up. And I think that that's what we're hoping for out of this process of the faith-based network that we're trying to build. And I think that we want to bring that sense that ICUJP can play a role in that, but it's going to have to be far beyond just the ranks of the people who come to the Friday Forum. And I think we had some success with that on the the networking event, the first one that we had, and I think we want to figure out how to pursue that. The other piece of it, I think, that came up from what Fernando was talking about, and that we went into it with, is the question of what is the link between peace and justice, and the sort of international, the global, and the local. And again, I think looking at it as systemic racism, we did identify the racism in so-called foreign policy and in the the war-making machine. And it didn't come out too much in the groups, but if you've read some of Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's histories, she talks about the fact that the wars on the native people are the basis of all these other wars that the U.S. is fighting, and that the military consciously uses that model. They talk about Vietnam or Iraq as quote unquote Indian country when they're involved in these invasions. And I think that bringing that consciousness to doing anti-racist work on domestic issues like housing or like healthcare is something that ICUJP can also contribute to the mix, to say it's not only a question of the resources that are going into the war machine that could be devoted to healthcare, but it is systemic, and how do we deal with that system? And so I think that opens up questions of anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism, transformation of the whole society and our relations with other people. So those are some things we do want to pursue through this process, and I'd be interested in more feedback about that from people, and connections that we each may have to anti-racism or racial justice, committees and different faiths, and how we can bring those together. So I don't know if there are comments or responses people have to some of that, but I'd be interested. Go ahead, Rose.
First of all, that was great, Michael. Absolutely fantastic. I put up a little clap thing at one point and it vanished, but absolutely great. Just a couple of things I want to say. I don't know whether anybody else was on the call yesterday from the Poor People's Campaign about Christian nationalism, but that was set up by the Faith Committee of the Poor People's Campaign in Los Angeles. They had incredible people on there. A lot of them were local. And I think that's definitely a group that we really want to link with, because they were dynamic. It was, I think it'll probably be on YouTube if you haven't seen it, but it was good. Second thing I want to say.
I'm sorry, just to say, we did have somebody in one of the earlier planning sessions, and we have been in touch with them, but I passed that around and then I failed to attend it myself. I'm sorry, I missed it.
No, that's fine. But I mean, Colleen, who presented Poor People's Campaign to us, is actually somebody I can get in touch with easily on that one. The second thing I want to say, I mean, it's a small world. Our church anti-racism committee voted just in the last meeting this week that we're going to approach the local surge, which is actually set up in apparently a synagogue somewhere in Echo Park, and we're going to link with them. So the links are happening. It's like the mycelium.
Yeah, White People for Black Lives has discussion groups pretty much every Saturday of white people. They are the local affiliate of Showing Up for Racial Justice, but they have a group in the San Fernando Valley, a group that meets in the Jewish Community Center in the Silver Lake Echo Park area. They have a group out in Claremont. They have I think one in Orange County, and they have a Sunday separate one that's Zoom only for people who can't go to the group. So there's a lot going on there. I see a lot of hands up, so I'm not sure who's up first, but Steve, Stephen, and Vita. Why don't you go first,
It
Steve?
was Vida, Stephen, and
Oh,
Steve.
okay. All right, Vida, go ahead.
All right. Thank you. I love the idea. I think this is really the committee's onto something. And one of the things that I find helpful is to attend Reverend Lawson's nonviolent workshops once a month. He is always inspirational. Phil and some of the other people on ICUJP attend. I loved it when we could go to Holman, but even on Zoom, it is good. And you see such a collection of people from all areas, but they're all I believe, interested in social justice. And Lawson is very much in favor of labor organizations. And we got that message, I think, from Steve about they're going to be honoring him at the Center for Labor Studies at UCLA. But he's just such a wonderful resource that I recommend whenever you can. It's 9 to 11 on Saturday morning, about usually the third or fourth Saturday morning. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Stephen Fisk and then Steve Rohde.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize when we talk about systemic racism that within the system, how the system has evolved. For example, Crispr Attucks was the first person who died in the Revolutionary War, a Black man. And that Blacks fought in the Revolutionary War, actually, for both sides. And in both World Wars, Blacks and people of color served in the military. In the Civil War, over 100,000 Blacks fought for the Union, and 40,000 lost their lives. So it's important to recognize that over the course of time, changes have taken place. And for example, the Tuskegee Airmen in World War II were honored for their great service in battle, and where Blacks were thought, oh, they couldn't possibly have the wherewithal to handle these flying war machines, and they did it with honor and service and greatness. One of the most honored regiments in the military was the Tuskegee Airmen. And when I was playing basketball for New York University in the 1960s, I think I've told this story before, we had an integrated team, Blacks and Puerto Ricans and whites and so forth. And we went and played Southern schools, and there wasn't a person of color on any of the Southern teams. But now there are, of course. And so we see that the system is capable of change. The system is capable of change. And it is our job to change the narrative, to change the mindset, the consciousness that permits a systemic racist system. And it can be done, and it has created change over the years. We've got to get better at it.
Thanks, Steve Rohde.
Well, I agree with the proposal that the next step in this plan be this invitational working meeting. I think we should deepen and broaden our work, and then early next year organize another larger meeting. I think the invitational part of that meeting, and I think we're hinting at this, Michael, I think we need some trained facilitators, some people in the sense of who are immersed in this work already and can guide us. Now, I immediately respond to myself by saying these should not be lectures, these should not be one-sided pundits. I'm hopeful the committee can locate people, and Karen and her connections are a great resource. And the Poor People's Campaign. I think we've already hit on a couple resources. Because as you said, Michael, in our breakout group, and we've said this for years at ICUJP, we should never ignore our own resources and our own insights and our own brilliance in some cases. So I think the next session should find a balance between some facilitators, some substantive facilitators, and space then for those invited to express themselves, to be, I'm so grateful to Rose today to talk about areas that she found wanting in one of her sessions. That's healthy candor. And then finally, years ago, one of my Progressive Jewish Alliance, working with a mosque, joined up with Habitat for Humanity with a day of building houses. And so I want to eventually move past the theoretical into actions. To get out of our spaces, get out of our planning meetings, and find one or more joint projects that themselves contribute to communities that are struggling as a result of racism and oppression, economically and otherwise. So it doesn't have to be Habitat for Humanity, but I wanted to make a very specific example so people can begin to think about. And now maybe with the lifting of COVID, if we're safe and we're careful, the mosque near, we had our colleague from Imam Sadiq Safir's mosque. They do a Skid Row food pantry and health provision of healthcare and materials spread out in the streets in Skid Row. Clue would probably be a great resource for some of this. So facilitators, our own expertise and dialogue, and then some work in the streets. Thanks.
Great program.
Yeah, I like the idea, and we've certainly been talking about doing some action in the streets, but both the project to feed the homeless or the hungry and Habitat for Humanity are more charitable. And I would like us to join forces to support some action that actually is geared to changing systemic racism. Something like picketing something.
I see a hand up from Lucy. I do want to say there are other projects. There's a whole mutual aid network in Los Angeles, which is connected with LA Can and Street Watch. And it's not so much about picketing. It is about concrete, practical work, but it's practical work that engages with the people who are facing the trials and tribulations, and so that their agency and their participation is part of what's involved. And I think that approach, is not, it is practical, but it's not, charitable or hierarchical. So we could look for. I think the general spirit of what Steve is saying is that we want to do things that will actually concretely transform conditions for people. And I think there are things we could find. Lucy's got a hand up.
On the picketing, I would say that if the message on the sign is sufficient, it will change hearts and minds. So picketing, there might be a place for that, although maybe not me holding up a sign at this age. But I will say this about a practical project. The Daughters of the American Revolution have given money for tree planting. And I think when two people plant a tree, and who has seen the poem As Lovely as a Tree, right? You can, whatever color you are, it doesn't matter because it matters about the tree. So maybe we should think about that fellow tree people up there, Andy Lipkiss, and what he might be able to provide. Thank you.
Sure. So on the question of systemic racism, one of the provisions in the Build Back Better social funding bill talked about tree equity, and it was immediately attacked by the Republicans because they saw it as, wokeness, trying to deal with connecting anti-racism to the urban environment. Just amazing.
And I would go back maybe to what Stephen said about trading Manhattan for beads. It occurs to me that at the time, if I'm correct, the Native Americans could not conceive of owning land, period.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So the beads were seen by them potentially as like a housewarming gift when you go and you bring something. In Korea, I think toilet paper is something that you bring for a housewarming gift. And if we can all change our minds and hearts to understand that approach towards the land or towards our earth, yeah, that'd be good. If we can understand that and realize again that it's our stewardship that counts, not our so-called ownership.
Thanks. There are
But
a few
that's a
hands
hard
up
one.
again. A few hands up again, and in the chat, Avon wrote, "This has undoubtedly been brought up before, but my idea is that each of us should commit to bringing new people into ICUJP, hopefully younger folks, and hopefully people of color and from diverse religious groups." So I have Fernando, Vida, and Doc Ruby. Fernando, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I like what Carol Francis has said. Maybe create an action. I'm thinking about the Gascon group. We cannot also assume that they would not respond. Because many of them also are activists, and so we have to really see it to ourselves because it doesn't mean they participated. They will, I agree with some of that with Carol, but we cannot also definitely assume that they would not participate, and so it's really up to us to create an action, as I said, thinking of, maybe in support with Gascon, and maybe create a report because the people in the community are puzzled with him because they supported him, but people are still disappointed of what's happening. There's no real report, in terms of, this police abuse and so forth. The police abuse still continuing and so forth. But anyhow, maybe, we can work on that,
Thanks, Vida, and then Dr. Ruby.
Oh, yes, I just wanted to think about what Carol Francis was talking about. I think Anthony, his presentation on the homelessness or housing for the homeless was so impressive to see that work. And it was not a charitable kind of thing. It's like changing the system.
Mm-hmm.
And in our church, we've been trying to, which is not easy. We want to build affordable housing on the church lot. We've got space there. I don't know if we'll be able to do it or not, but that kind of thing is, as I say, it's not just charitable.
Mm-hmm.
though, that I think you can't ignore where charitable work is needed. Like we are handing out boxes of food with the YMCA, with our lot, and people can drive up and get that. And there are people in need. And like Reverend Barber said, you go from the bottom up and make these changes. And so I think these efforts are what really help.
Yeah, there was a picture, I think, in Houston of 10,000 cars on a line for food distribution the other week. There's no question that the needs are enormous. Dr. Ruby and then Steve Rohde again, and I think we need to move towards wrapping up.
Yes, good morning. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get on this morning because I'm in a meeting and then I have appointment and I'm traveling. And I want to I love and respect what everyone has expressed. I sent some information to you regarding the health, if that wasn't expressed on the work. And the one thing that I want to say that if you want more clergy involved, be sure and have your next meeting not on a Saturday or Sunday, because especially for joining or for bringing, and the church leaders can bring in other people to work. So that's the only other thing I want to express. The information about housing is wonderful. Everything that was expressed is wonderful. And so I'm going back on mute, and I'll be on mute also for the rest of the meetings.
If not Saturdays and Sundays, how about early Friday mornings? Does that work for a lot of people? Anyway, Ruby, I love your thoughts. I realized I missed my own point when I mentioned Habitat for Humanity. It was the shoulder-to-shoulder time, the camaraderie, the socializing, the humanizing of the groups that was very important to building solidarity, friendship, and long-term relationships. So I understand that charity can be on the side of individualized prejudice versus combating systemic racism, and we've got to find that. But I wanted to emphasize it from the standpoint, and it also goes to something ICUJP has said for decades. And COVID has suffocated this. We got to get out of our own comfortable homes and neighborhoods. We used to go to the Korean church downtown and to other places. And we've got to next year rebuild that. And that's what Brian Stevenson calls proximity. We have to be in touch and shoulder to shoulder with the very communities that are suffering this kind of oppression. So it's somewhere in there that I hope we can build that action piece.
The camaraderie idea goes along with the trees idea, the working together idea, shoulder to shoulder.
Mm-hmm. Sure, put you
and the proximity, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just to say, I think some of the most the high water marks of radical activity in the United States were things like the Black Panther Party free breakfast for children program and their free clinics and shoe distribution and helping seniors get to their homes and cash their checks. And so I think that kind of practical activity is really, really important to engage in. So we're at 9:20, and why don't we take one last comment from Fernando and from Carol Francis, and then I don't know if we have somebody prepared to do a closing benediction, but maybe somebody wants to think about that. Fernando?
Well, hopefully people would not misunderstood us. We are supporting many of this charity organization, like the housing, the food pantry, because I have, I used to have a food distribution, under our organization before, and so we're doing that, and But only thing, maybe if we do that, if we support that, we also have some kind of agenda to deepen our understanding in terms of this systemic racism, and so in terms of education and so forth. I just wanted to just say that. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Carol Francis.
Yeah, I just want to say I really like the idea of the proximity and the working with LACAN or the Muslim feeding. I've done that once and it was really moving. I think that's really good. And if nothing more than getting our people, like you were saying, Steve, immersed in the lives that we're working already. And I just think that should be balanced with some events that are actually challenging. So we have these events where we're in Skid Row and we're talking to people and we're serving the people, but also some events where we can ask them what we want to do, what they want us to do to challenge systemic racism.
Yeah, LACAN has been involved with, and going back to the question of Aware LA and Surge, White People for Black Lives, they had a Share the Wealth campaign in downtown LA that specifically was designed to try to communicate between the people who live on Skid Row and in single room occupancy housing and the people being brought in for gentrification of the downtown areas to try to bridge that gap. I think there are a lot of things that could be done along those lines. I do want to remind people the parable of people seeing babies floating down a river and rushing to try to rescue the babies, and then somebody saying, "I want to go up the river and see who's throwing the babies into the river." In terms of the systemic nature of the problem, that we can try to solve each individual situation that people have, and we should, but we have to think about what's causing those situations on a broader scale and combine that work. So it is 9:23. We do have a board meeting after this. We want to, have our closing benediction, a circle where we lift people up individually and just a few reminders of what's coming.
I just want to remind people that other than the Friday, the third Friday, and if there's a fifth Friday, the other Fridays, we have our committee meetings and would like you all to join us.
Yes, you read my mind. So we're skipping next week. The next meeting is December 3rd, the first Friday of December. So I assume either the program committee or now this.
That's the.
Yeah, so 9:30, December 3rd, this planning will go on.
Yes.
And I hope everyone will, who can, will join that effort. If Ruby is still here, we haven't heard too much from her today, and Michael, maybe after we join hands, Ruby could give the closing prayer.
Yeah, she said she had to mute herself because she was at another meeting, I think, but maybe Father Chris left. I don't know. Looks like Grace got knocked off. She said she had bandwidth problems.
I don't know if anyone has any readings handy or any.
Stephen Fisk is good.
That's true.
Maybe Stephen could lead us in a song. So anyway,
I can lead us in a closing benediction.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Whenever
if people have individuals they wanted to lift up at this point, this would be the appropriate time to do that.
Well, I would say about the babies being thrown in the river, it occurs to me that from what I've seen on TV, climate change is going to be throwing a lot of babies in the in the river, and I would like to lift up that problem for the right solution. Thank you.
And I would add to that food for the world.
I would like to lift up my pastor, Floyd McKeithen. He's got some health problems and I want him to be okay. Lift him up in your thoughts and prayers.
I've reconnected with a person from my high school, and she shared with me recently two very good friends of hers. One of her best girlfriends has non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and is fighting and being given her last days, and a second friend has glioblastoma and is in that person's closing days. And I promise to lift both of those people up within our circle.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to lift up, like Bill Gates. Hopefully there's more Bill Gates that will contribute to solve this systemic problem. Because
Contribute.
I'm not anti, rich. I'm only anti-rich when they become, their God is money. That's like forgetting that there's humanity in our society, and so I want to lift them up to support many of this work, because it cannot be achieved by a handful of people, but it can be solved by the people itself. Thank you.
This will be a little odd, but I'd like to lift up KPFK. Its problems are very severe. It's kind of on life support at this point in a certain way, because the funding problems have been very, very difficult. We've just gone to the same well too many times, asking people for donations, and I'm not sure what the solution to that would be, but I think that to the extent that anybody here can donate, there's another membership drive that's going to be upcoming, I think December 7th, to close out the year and try to right the ship a little bit there. I have been making proposals to the new general manager regarding programming, and I'd be interested in thinking about an interfaith, faith-based show there that's more dialogical. But I would like it to be actually a much younger element than ICUJP, because I think that the future, if the station has a future, it's got to be by connecting with the current generation of people. So if people have ideas about that, talk to me offline or later on. And if people do have some resources, they can provide the station on this next membership drive. Please do so.
Michael, just before we go to Stephen, I just want to look out on this screen. We're approaching Thanksgiving. We've had different discussions about the meaning of Thanksgiving, and we'll all recognize or celebrate it in our own ways. But for me, what I'm giving thanks for this season is each of you. It is a blessing to be with you in this work. It's a blessing to be friends, to be supportive of each other, to look for the best in each other for all these years, with different time periods that each of you have participated in ICUJP. So I know that ICUJP and what it means and the people in it are what I'm going to give thanks for on next Thursday. And I'm very grateful to each one of you. Our new communications director, Morgan Tucker, has just come on the screen to participate in our board meeting shortly. I give thanks for her joining us and for each of you. It means a lot, and no one should take any of this for granted. The consistency, seeing 17 good friends on these mornings is sustaining. It's important. It's a loving reflection of what we feel for each other. And I'm immensely grateful for it. So thank you all.
Thanks, Steve. Stephen, you want to send us off as far as the general meeting, and then people can stay for the board after. Take a little break.
So let us all take some deep breaths and know that each breath does not come with a denomination or a racist attitude or a political perspective. Each breath is a gift from the divine source of many names and many forms. And we are all the recipients of this grace, this life, this beautiful existence on this planet, so beautifully designed to be sustainable for all of life. And that energy that comes to us with every breath and every heartbeat is a divine gift of grace. It's filled with love and support for each and every one of us to see our dreams come true and to build a world of sustainable peace and honor and respect for all human beings and all living things, and doing no harm to anybody and to anything. This is the call of interfaith, the first word of the name of this organization, interfaith communities, where we come together, not isolated in our individual silos, but coming to mix, coming to integrate, coming to cross-pollinate our ideas and to grow and to learn and to be blessed because of that growth and because of the curiosity that we are so blessed to be born with. So as we go forth from this day, let us honor that breath. Let us honor that spirit that is really the common ground for all human beings on this earth. And let us go forth and do the work that's asked of us, the service that was asked of us to give to make this world a better place. Amen.